This week's Trump campaign shakeup involved bringing on a couple of new faces to the campaign, which we're going to talk about in just a little bit. But Paul Manafort, the campaign chairman, we were told he was going to be staying on, that this wasn't like getting rid of people and replacing them. This was just adding, growing. And yeah, he stuck around for 2 days and now he's gone. They booted his ass. And so that did not take a long time, which makes their assurances earlier in the week seem a little bit ridiculous. Now, we do have a going away statement from the Trump campaign saying, this morning Paul Manafort offered and I accepted his resignation from the campaign. I love it. He offered it. He wanted me to have it. I didn't put any pressure on him whatsoever. I am very appreciative for his great work in helping to get us where we are today, and in particular his work guiding us through the delegate and convention process, especially because I have no idea what that process involves. Paul is a true professional, and I wish him the greatest success. Well, isn't that nice? The timing seems a bit suspect, because generally I think that you should limit in 1 week to either getting rid of your career or possibly going down for your involvement in Ukrainian politics and stoking protests that involves people throwing rocks at U.S. soldiers and setting the stage for pro-Putin forces to take over and Putin to largely control a significant portion of the country now. Do one or the other, basically. That's what I'm saying. And so he is now out. Now, we don't know. We're going to continue to track, obviously, if he did end up breaking laws involving bringing foreign money in to lobby U.S. government officials. He's not cleared from that now, but some of the taint that would have gone on to Donald Trump will be cleared.
Yeah. So my favorite theory on this about bringing Bannon in, getting rid of Manafort, I think the Manafort thing is that half of the equation does have to do with Ukraine. It also has to do with the second half, which I'm going to get to in a second. But they mentioned some of the people around Trump, including Eric Trump. Mentioned that his dad made the decision, which, by the way, sounds like he was fired rather than resigned, and partly because of the troubles he's having with whether he did something illegal in Ukraine. Again, if the Trump people have problems with you that you did something immoral, wow, okay. So those investigations of Manafort might be quite significant.
Yeah, Eric Trump was so shocked at the news that he stopped sawing the head off of an elephant.
Oh, was that Eric or Donald Trump? Jr.
I think it was both. I think there's pictures with both of them, like holding up elephant
Well, I thought that was a joke about the mascot of the Republican Party, literally. I was like, that's a really funny joke.
Yeah. It worked multiple levels.
Yeah, that's right.
He's rubbed off on me.
In a sense, that's kind of what their dad is doing right now.
Exactly.
Paul Manafort.
And then he leaves it in Reince Priebus's bed.
If you look at it this way, so it was originally Corey Lewandowski, then Paul Manafort, now Bannon. Paul Manafort, who is a corrupt piece of whatever, barely cracks the top 3 horrible human beings to run his campaign. Those other 2 guys are way worse.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, like, who's really running the show right now is Roger Ailes. You know, that's who's pulling the strings behind this. They're literally bringing on like a serial, like essentially like molester to be running their campaign behind the curtain. That's who's running the show. It's not Banyan, and it's not Lewandowski or whatever her name is, Kellyanne. They're not running the show. It's Roger Ailes from Fox News, who just got booted for molesting like every woman who walked through his doorway.
You know why they hired Roger Ailes, though? Because they couldn't get Bill Cosby, apparently, I guess.
No, but that's a great point by Jimmy. I mean, this is a murderer's row of like misfits and miscreants, and I mean, so I thought
we're gonna see Blagojevich next.
No shit.
Right. I mean, but he would like be a major step up.
Yes.
Here. So Lewandowski like roughing people up and
taking
assault
credentials away,
charges, intimidating the press, yelling at everybody, like a terror, right? And then they go to Manafort, who might have like a giant corruption scandal so bad that even Trump gets rid of him, right? Then they go to Bannon, who, according to his former employees, almost universally, is like the worst guy they've ever seen. Yeah. He's an absolute terror inside Breitbart, according to their reports, right? One of them said attending a regular meeting at Breitbart News, led by Steve Bannon, was like attending a white supremacist rally. He said he would not stop, insulting every race, women. It goes just all the way down
sexuality.
The list. Right. And then on top of all that, then you've got the serial molester, sexual harasser, Roger Ailes.
No, and on top of that, I don't know if you saw this. This is people say, oh, you guys just cover every bad thing about Trump. We're not even making a full story of this. One of his new foreign policy advisors, did you see this news?
No.
He's apparently, like all these quotes are coming out, a massive Holocaust denier and anti-Semite.
Oh my God.
Says who?
He's all, says who?
Says who?
Says who?
Says who?
Says
Wait.
The polls.
Wait. Says who?
Yeah, he said that those ovens are way too small to kill 6 million Jews.
No,
apparently, yeah.
really?
And he's a foreign policy advisor.
Okay.
Now,
Jesus
in Trump's
Christ.
What's your
defense,
what's your
Trump
question?
doesn't listen to his advisors. So,
That's true.
Anyway.
Okay, so now let's go to the second half of this equation, which is, so this Bannon and Ailes, what is he up to? So I think it's a twofold strategy. Well, maybe three, because he had to get rid of Manafort, so that's point one. Point two is, screw it, we're down so much now, well, we might as well double down. You know, in Turkish there's a saying, a sunk fish swims sideways. Just keep going in that same direction. We're already sunk. Let's see what happens. Now let Trump be Trump. I don't know. We won the primaries that way. John makes a great point about that when we did the show together on Wednesday, which is he was already Trump. It's not like he ever pivoted, right?
Have you covered what Michael Moore has said? His theory about this is that. Have you covered it?
Yeah, I did. And so that gets to point three, which is now there are significant rumors reported on by the New Yorker, among others,
Vanity Fair.
Vanity Fair, that this is all in setting up for a media operation after he loses.
Well, it looks like.
Yeah, so what Michael Moore pointed out was he said he had sources that knew that he was just using the presidential run to get a better contract with NBC on Apprentice, and then he, of course, bungled that, as he does with every business operation he's ever been involved in.
Yes.
Instead, they fired him. So then he's like, I guess I'm really running. I don't think this plot, the media plot, was throughout. It was in the beginning for NBC. That didn't work. Then he's like, oh my God, I'm winning. What the hell, right? And now that he sees he's about to, lose, and fairly significantly if the polling is accurate right now, so he's like, oh, well, the great thing about media is you don't need to win 51% of the vote. Fox News makes $1.5 billion in profit every year, and their top-rated show, Bill O'Reilly, has an audience of, on a best night, 3 million people. That's about 1% of the population.
Right.
All you need is 1% of the population to be enormously rich. So now he thinks, people are like, they don't get it. They're like, Steve Bannon has never run a political operation. He's just a media guy. Roger Ailes is a media guy. Oh, so, and the reason it's in the Loser Donald segment is because he's such a loser, he already knows he lost.
Yeah.
This is him going, so what? I'll just turn it into any other scam where I try to make money off of it anyway.
Right, but he's like a master of adaptation. You got to give him credit for that, right? He's looking at this situation and going, well, I may not win the presidency, but what can I turn this into? What can I spin it into, right? So turn it into a media empire. I think it's inherently his limitation. I think it's why he's losing so bad in the campaign is he looks at it like it's a business. This isn't business. You're not looking for 30% market share, which he's dominating right now. He gets 30%. They show up to his rallies. They're excited. But he's not going to get to 50% plus one, which is what you need to win an election, right? On the other hand, he's totally playing a different game than anybody else in American politics today. And you got to be careful with that. You can look at an article by Malcolm Gladwell, How Davids Beat Goliaths, and it tells you what you got to do is innovate and play by a different set of rules. That's how you can take down Goliaths if you're David. And right now Trump's David, and he is definitely playing a different game than Hillary Clinton.
So that's a good point, Ryan. But so, and I thought that Donald Trump had a chance of winning. I mean, as recently as 2 weeks ago when I was on ABC's This Week, I had him right after the convention, still up slightly. Boy, has that changed in 2 weeks, and partly because of all the things that he's done. And I thought, if anybody's going to beat an establishment Democrat, you need a wild card, and Trump's a wild card, and so by playing by different rules, he might win. But then, as I've studied Donald Trump's history, I've been forced to because of this campaign, and I've done enough of these Loser Donald segments, I know his pattern. Here's how it goes. He does something spectacular. He puts his name in big lights, and he opens up 3 casinos at once. He gets all this attention. He gets this money because his dad already had money and had given him a line of credit and all this stuff. And then it looks like it's working for a while. And you're like, oh my God, he's dominating Atlantic City, and you look at all the towers that he built. But then he doesn't know what the hell he's doing, and it always crashes at the end. That's why none of his products exist. That's why there's no Trump steaks, there's no Trump water, there's no Trump planes, there's no Atlantic City left. He doesn't have any of those casinos. He's gone bankrupt 6 times. So same thing on this presidential run. Like, oh, hey, wait a minute, look, he got all that name, attention, Trump, and that helped him to win the primary, and then he gets into the general election, boom, runs into a brick wall because of his own incompetence, which will be the same exact thing that happens with his so-called media empire that they want to build. It will launch, I mean, this is my guess, right? and great fanfare, and everybody will talk about Trump, and in the beginning it'll look like it's succeeding, and oh my God, there'll be 1,000 articles written about what a genius business ploy it was, and the brand name, and all this stuff, and then eventually no one will watch. You know why? Because this clown's going to put himself on.
Yeah.
And this is another segment I did on Luther Donald. He originally wanted to go into entertainment, but he couldn't get into USC. And then he tried to finance a Broadway play, and that failed. He's been dying to get into entertainment his whole life, and he's been failing his whole life.
Well, he was on The Apprentice, and you got to admit that was successful.
Yes, and I mentioned
He's
that
a
in
great
that segment.
statue.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right now.
I mentioned that in that segment. The one success he had was Apprentice, where his whole thing was, you're fired, right? That's his catchphrase, etc. And give him credit for that, and it had a really nice run.
Yeah.
So,
and
by
he's
the-
great at fucking over people, you know? I mean,
Yeah.
he's a magician at that.
That's right. But remember, he didn't run Apprentice. He was the host on Apprentice.
Yes.
If he was running it as a company, no way it would have worked. I know
also-
the really smart people who worked on Apprentice. It was largely them. He was fine as a clown, as a character on that show. He played a nice clown.
Yeah.
And so, but when if he's going to go and try to do like a talk show, people in the beginning will be like, oh, Trump, oh, let's look at his empty podium or whatever, right? And on minute 17, they're going to be like, and certainly on day 17, they're going to be like, he's still saying the same stupid things.
Yeah.
Well, he's
Didn't
not.
learn anything.
He doesn't have interest in other people, which is what you need as a talk show host. So if he tries to do that, it will just be about him, and it will be a wreck.
It'll be a
wonder-
wreck.
But they're going to do something.
Yeah, for
and I
sure.
wonder what it's going to be.
And by the way, we saw this with Sarah Palin. She started Sarah TV.
Oh, that's right. How'd that
Just
do?
destroyed.
That's
She did
not
a couple of vlogs. It was really weird and creepy. And now, what's Sarah TV?
People paid for that, right? Was it $10?
Yeah, I think that there was like an online membership program. But how could those ever work?
But
But
by the way, hold on. So I know through people in the industry that the people who started that Sarah TV stuff use the Young Turks as a model, and I know that Breitbart as an organization has been complimentary of us. So bless their hearts on that. Although we wildly disagree, right? And so everybody uses this model, and they think, oh, it's easy. Young Turks do it. You just get on there and blah blah blah, and then you know.
Yeah. There's nothing to it.
No. Like we have a subscription because we offer a lot of shows to people. We offer them something that they're missing, an outsider perspective that's anti-establishment. There's a thing here. There's a thing we do that people like.
Subliminal messaging.
Right. That's. Could you imagine? Okay. It's not very subliminal. tytnetwork.com/join. Join up right now. See, not subliminal at all. Okay. So we met a market need, which was, to the best of our ability, truth-telling. We have a whole set of hosts. It's a real company. But conservatives don't know how to run real companies. They're like, oh, I don't know, we'll just do the same thing. Sarah, go out there. And I'll be joining and TVing and doing all these things, right? And everybody's like, oh, nobody wants to watch that. Nobody's going to pay for that, right? And then they go out of business. Look at the Blazes in massive trouble. So I'm telling you, when this Trump so-called media empire starts, it'll start with a bang and it'll end with a fizzle, like they all do.